So we are very much looking forward to listening interesting presentations this afternoon. And so without further ado, I give the floor to Emeritus Professor Eero Ropo from Tampere University, who will be moderating the event. So please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pia, for this introduction. And welcome to this webinar from my point of view also. It's a pleasure to be with you here and to be moderating this very interesting session. The common topic is educational leadership and what we can do with leadership to enhance student learning in the different educational institutions. And I'm looking forward to having very interesting discussion and very interesting presentations from our guest speakers who are experts in their area. So let me introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Mika Risku from University of Jyväskylä. He's head of Institute of Educational Leadership, which is training Finnish school principals, and this institute has a history of being only one of those, only one of the institutes that are training principals in Finland. So he has been with the institute since 1996 and been head of this institute since 2013. Mika Risku's recent interests are in positioning and conceptualizing the phenomenon of leadership in the field of education, and his presentation will be very good example of this thinking and conceptualizing of leadership concept in education. So this also involves issues of educational policy and governance and developing educational organizations and leaders. So I'm really happy to give you the floor, and your presentation is titled as Positioning and Conceptualizing Leadership in the Context of Education. So floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, and happy to be here, and nice to see everyone. As I come from the Institute of Educational Leadership, could I first ask if people could have their cameras on? If it's possible, it's always nicer to have human beings on the screen. And the first thing that I would like to say about educational leadership is that it's for people, about people, and with people. And without further delay, I'll start my presentation. So here we go. Positioning and conceptualizing leadership in the context of education, but from the perspective of the topic of our webinar today. Simply, we think that the field of research of educational leadership is about the phenomenon of leadership in the field of education. It means that we are examining the phenomenon of leadership in the framework of education. So what is education to do, why, how, where, when, with, and by whom? And if we further look into the different approaches to education in the field of education, at the moment we think that it's important to look into education sociology and critical pedagogy, then look into education policy, system and governance, and of course in relation to learning pedagogy. The other part of the compound word of educational leadership, leadership, there we think that we can rely on more general research on organizations and leadership, but we do hope that we as soon as possible get our own educational leadership research too, that would look into organizations and leadership from the perspective of education as presented, for example, in this slide. Let's start looking at these different fields of research and starting with that of leadership. I'm here referring to the Bass and Bass book on leadership, on general leadership. In all, we can find 19 different kinds of definitions for leadership from 3 main perspectives. For our use here, we will pick the one that I have at the upper part of the slide. We will be looking at leadership as ensuring that the organization is fulfilling its mission, because we think that the field of education as a field of life has a mission that no other field of life has. And this mission makes also educational leadership unique among the other approaches on leadership. Continuing to organization research, as you can see in the slide, very many ways of defining an organization again. From these different definitions for our use here, we will pick the Cambridge Dictionary definition for an organization, and that's organization as a group of people who work together in an organized way for a shared purpose. And again, we can think that this purpose is what we refer to with the concept of the mission. In the definition, we also notice that it takes into consideration organization as a group of people. And here we could relate to the organization as a community too. And then we come to a bit different kind of research. The difference between an organization and community is something that we've been really working with during the last 1.5 years that we've been collaborating with the Indian CreateNet organization. And from the Finnish perspective, I can say that we've really learned a lot. Then to the framework of education, and here first educational sociology. It's important for our use because it studies the mission, methods, structures, and processes of education. If you look at the bottom part of this slide, it also looks into individuals and communities and their social relationships. So in relation to the concept of the community. This is very important for the topic of our webinar, which is about communities consisting of the school, of the families, of the parents, of the children and youth. There's one problem from the perspective of educational leadership that we identify in this slide too, and that is that educational sociology is looking at education as socializing in the surrounding cultural environment and developing as a member of society and community. And from the Finnish perspective, we think that we look into education as a power making the future, making the world a better place. We will return to this, but via looking into education policy I very much love here the Finnish ways of defining education policy as the societal will for what education should do. And in Finland, we definitely link education policy with the general societal decision making. And what is this will? What is education to do? The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights regards education as a basic human right. Then we can go to the United Nations Millennium Declaration, and very clearly shows us how we try to get rid of something that we consider harmful and advance something that we consider valuable through education. What this would be for Finland, I think our present government program captures beautifully. It's education and culture. In Finnish, we would talk about sivistys, which does not really have a proper translation in English. Then there would be well-being, and then there would be learning, or the level of education and competence. And we increasingly come to these basic goals for education. And they are also to serve equity and equality. And equity and equality we can also define in different ways. And the Finnish perspective on equity and equality relates to the radical view on equality, which is not really comparing people amongst themselves, but comparing people with criteria, often societal criteria that we've set for Finland. And it's not really the traditional equality in the sense that, for example, if a youth requires more to reach the goals that we've agreed for everyone, or a family in the same way, we will give that child, that youth, that family more support, more resources, whatever is needed to reach that societal goal that we've set. Let's look into the topic for our webinar, that of an educational community consisting of the local community, families, parents, children, youth. We go to look at the Finnish educational legislation, and here the driving force in Finland is that of early childhood education, I would say, which we transferred from social services to educational services 2014. And what is taking place, for example, in legislation for early childhood education is something that we will try to do increasingly also in the other education forms. In relation to our webinar topic, Section 4 in our Early Childhood Education Act says that a daycare center is to ensure that children can participate in the daycare center decision making. The same act also says that we have to take the child's parents into the decision making as well. The daycare center, and this goes for schools as well, have to be proactively in doing so. And the main perspective is always that of the priority of the interest of the child. And this goes for all decision making, really. If there is, for example, a local, whatever kind of decision to be made, and it includes children in one way or another, local authorities are obligated to make a child impact evaluation. And when that is being conducted, when it's a child below the age of 18, naturally also the parents have to be involved in it. Looking at Finnish education system, as I said earlier, we transferred early childhood education from social services into educational services in 2014. And this also meant that we started having families, parents, children more integrated in the whole education system. And as I also said, early childhood education in many ways in Finland that is the force that is driving how we collaborate with parents, children, and youth. And how we do this then is following what I think Hargreaves and Shirley very beautifully have described in their fourth way approach. It is that we have a national will, for example, that we must have inclusion in a way that parents can take part in the decision making in daycare centers and schools, and in the same way the obligation to include children and youth. Then how we do this is that we allow a lot of local autonomy in how to interpret, recontextualize, and enact this national will. Our role at the university is to support this mechanism in the best possible way, so that we would really meet the national goals and build from the bottom. This may be very concrete things. So, for example, 2009, the National Agency for Education sent an instruction to all schools that if they are having school photographs, which we traditionally have at the beginning of the school year, photographs of school classes, etc., which company comes to make these photographs is something that schools have to decide together with the parents. Whatever you want to abolish a school, you have to include children, youth, and parents in that decision making. So from very small to very large concrete decisions, this principle has to be followed. About Finnish education governance, we can find 5 governance lines today. There's the government governance line, presented with the blue boxes. Then there's the local governance line, presented with the green boxes. Then when we are making societal decisions, we also have to include trade unions, other national stakeholders, often in the form of NGOs, and also individuals like the children, youth, parents involved in daycare centers and schools. When we are making national level decisions, we have to proactively involve all these governance lines. When we are making municipality level decisions, the same thing. When we come to a daycare center, when we come to a school, exactly the same principle applies there too. All these schools and daycare centers have to describe in their curricula For Finns, the curriculum is a strategic document, which is really an agreement among all those 5 governance lines that I presented in the previous slide. In this slide, you have the curriculum reforms we've had during the independence of Finland, only 7 of them. The colors symbolize the blue ones, how we made the nation of Finland, and the green colors, how we started involving increasingly local and individual decision making. You could also call it as inclusion. And it's not just this curriculum that we have. Although, for example, for the comprehensive education curriculum, I can tell you that it includes 188 decisions that have to be made locally. And daycare centers and schools have to ensure that children, youth, and parents are involved when we are making these 188 local decisions. There are also other statutes like the Administrative Procedure Act. Then you have to include this kind of together decision-making in local ordinances, annual work plans, biannual equality plans, involvement plans in decision-making, etc., etc. There's the national will to do this, and then again, there's a lot of local autonomy how to do this. These are organization structures, and what is happening in Finland as we are shifting the mission of education is that we are trying to transform functional organizations into process and network organizations. It's a dramatic shift of thinking. Functional organizations think from the perspective of the organization. That's the traditional way of doing it. Process network organizations think from the perspective of the client. And for our webinar topic, that is the family, that is the child, that is the youth. And when we are doing a shift like this, we are moving functional teams of similar people together into multi-professional teams that would look into as holistic and client-friendly processes as possible. What we are getting as result increasingly are multi-purpose community centers like this one on the western coast of Finland, serving, in this case, a suburb in the city of Kokkola, the family, the child and the youth, even before they are born, to the old age. And it's not just teaching, as you can see. It's a wonderful richness of different kinds of services. We don't really know how to do this yet, and there's no one single way of doing it either. And that's, for me, the main thing to tell about Finland is that we are a wonderful research experimental laboratory, the whole nation, also in relation to how to build communities where we have inclusion of families, parents, youths, and then the educational organizations. I end my presentation here, and I thank you for listening to me. I worked at the macro level, as you noticed. I tried to give you some concrete examples too. They are necessary, but the problem or challenge with concrete examples is that they reach just a certain level, and we need also the generalizations, and that was what I tried to focus on in this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting introduction to our webinar, and thank you so much for raising these multiple issues to be discussed later in this session. If you have any urgent questions, please raise them now, and maybe one or two questions to Mikael before we continue. I don't see any hands, but okay, maybe then we are happy with this. Okay, Professor Srikat, please.
Thank you very much. I mean, I have a very small observation. In fact, my concern was, how do you meet these conflicting demands of different agencies, institutions located at different levels, you know, when you want to sort out the issues from national level organizations to trade unions to parent associations, etc. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful question. We often tend to give a picture of Finland as somehow uniform, which we are not at all. Then we also tend to give a picture of Finland as some kind of a serene paradise. And having worked as a secondary education principal for 15 years, it's far from that. And your question is a wonderful implication of how beautifully you observe. It's very difficult, it's very challenging. And what I did not talk about is that the national will may be to reach something, and at the same time you may be given insignificant resources to do that, and it's very demanding to be there in the between. And maybe one example of my own principalship times, we had some students who were in the local ice hockey team, juniors, and they needed to be able to leave the last lessons during some days a bit earlier, 10-15 minutes earlier. So we wanted to support the youth and the families, no problem for the school. So we agree, yes, you can do that. And then I could get phone calls from the other parents saying that we've heard that some of the students can leave school a bit early. But how is that possible? That is it now equal? Is it fair to everyone? So when you go to the everyday level, the diversity and everything, it can be very, very demanding, not just the national and regional and local and unit level, but also in the everyday. My answer to the parents was always the same. School is not a punishment. School is support. And we want to support our youth and families with different kinds of dreams and needs. Educational leadership means that you cannot treat people in the same way because they are all different. Education, culture, well-being, whatever it is, it's a bit different for each of us. And that's the challenge there too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's one question in the chat. concerning if this Finnish education system concerning parents' involvement would work in India. What do you think?
Was that a question to me?
I think I think so. But we have these Indian experts, of course, here, and maybe they can answer later.
If it was to me, as I said, we've now collaborated with CreateNet for 1.5 years. Last December, I also had my first ever opportunity to visit India in Delhi. I visited public schools, private schools. There were these 2 private schools, Mirambika and Prakriti. And, you know, it was like coming to a very, very good Finnish school. The atmosphere, climate and everything, and the dialogue with the children, youth and the expert teachers, and having the opportunity to talk with parents too. I would say that it's not just possible to be like that in India, but you already have it in India. The issue is how to get it to all schools. And maybe that's something that we struggle with in Finland too. We are not that perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we now go to our second presentation, which is given by Dr. Aditi Arur. And the topic is what educational leaders can learn from NGO school community partnerships. Assistant Professor Aditi Arur is from Christ University Department of Psychology. She has made her doctorate in University of Minnesota, USA, 2014, and her profile about research and interest says that she's qualitative researcher in education, program evaluator, curriculum designer, with 16 years of professional experience, with strong expertise in conducting gender transformative evaluations of girls' education programs in India. And she has also worked in areas of life skills education, gender and education, careers education, and she has a background of biomedical and public health education. So he's she has very multiple expertise in approaching these questions. So please welcome, and we are looking forward to your interesting presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share everyone can see the screen and hear me all right?
Yes, we can see the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a nice segue from Mikhail's presentation, which was on and this what I'm going to be talking about is the NGO examples in particular, because which is the non-governmental organization and works in partnership with the government organizations. And I'm focusing on India. So I thought let's start by highlighting one of the key issues that I think educational leaders in the Indian context need to pay attention to, and that is hierarchies in educational systems, which is a very integral part of Indian educational system. These hierarchies may be related to positional power, that is, most schools or educational universities or institutions, they're structured in a very hierarchical manner with positional power, you know, that leadership positions taken up, the experience, expertise, and so on. The other in Indian culture is often very also plays a lot of importance. So, ageism important age is a very important hierarchical structure which plays a role in teacher-student relationships, but also relationships within an institution. Expertise and merit-related, and I put merit in inverted commas because these seem to be individualistic attributes. However, expertise and merit are very much shaped by gender, caste, and class, depending on who has access to particular knowledge systems and experience. So these are some different kinds of hierarchies that we have to deal with in Indian educational systems. The next point what I wanted to highlight was, and it was really nice that Mikhail presented on, gave a quick gist on leadership related theories, organizational theories, and over there, which spoke about organizations as tools of domination. And I think I'm focusing more or elaborating more on that element which you talked about in your previous presentation. I'm drawing predominantly from a critical feminist which critiques existing leadership discourses, which tend to be predominantly masculinist and individualist in orientation. There were typically some of the, as example, some of these leadership discourses could be trait-based leadership. For example, the idea that leadership is an individualistic trait. It may be because a person has charisma or a person has, particular personality characteristics. That's what makes a leader. So something which is innate. So those are some leadership theories. There's leadership. There are behavioral leadership theories which speak of it in terms of innate characteristics, but for example, leadership styles can be developed. So behavioral models tend to think of leadership as something that can be learned and developed. However, those characteristics may still be valuing in traditional, inverted commas, masculine characteristics, such as forcefulness or aggressive competitiveness, and of course these are debatable as to whether those are good leadership attributes or whether those are even masculine. But historically, those have been valued as leadership attributes. And the third one is situational or contingency leadership theories, which tend to kind of say that these attributes or these styles are useful in these situations, and others might be more useful in other situations. So there's a little bit more attention paid to context within situational and contingency theories. But nevertheless, what critical feminist critique suggests that these are leadership, which is most of research in leadership has been done on institutions that usually have male leadership positions, and so then the data that we get ends up being representative of more masculinist and individualist ideas of leadership. So I'm drawing here from primarily Jill Blackmore, who has done a lot of work in developing a critical feminist perspectives on leadership, educational leadership in particular. And her critique on educational bureaucracies is certain observations are that often you'll see, especially in the context of educational institutions, that the lower ranks are often feminized. So teachers are often female. And in many places, and this may vary, of course, that administration or teaching, administration may tend to be largely male dominated. This may not necessarily be or empirically may not be an absolute kind of a difference, but there is that it generally tends to be. You will notice that there is this administration and teaching hierarchy. So that's that's one issue that has been identified. Also, there are certain ideas that, for instance, the hierarchy is often perceived as something that is needed. It's a division. It's justified in a rational sense as a division of labor within the organization. You need a singular authority. Domination is seen as legitimate. So these hierarchies are often seen as rational and legitimate. Again, ideas of individualistic, ideas of expertise and merit are often understood as individual, when often expertise and merit is very much shaped by the social context. So it does not take into consideration the gender division of labor at home or in society, which will play a role in the organization, educational organization. And so therefore, who can move up these leadership positions is often shaped by, the division of labor that the labor that a person, that women in particular might have to do at home as well as in the institution. So these are points, these are ideas, expertise and merit. We need to kind of contextualize these notions. And the last is another assumption that educational bureaucracies, the assumption of rationality, that organizations are neutral, rational, objective, right, is a common perception, and that they should not be emotional and subjective. So which has been associated as more feminine characteristics, being emotional or and so those are perceived to be not valuable attributes in educational leadership or generally in leadership. So these are some critiques that have been, that she's developed and other critical feminist theorists, educational leadership have developed. So what would it mean to kind of reconstruct educational leadership if from a feminist point of view? And here, predominantly drawing from Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings, who have written on morality, relational morality. The idea is that, of course, they did not write in the context of educational leadership, but critical feminist educational leadership theorists have drawn from these psychologists. And they point out that it's not about only including women in patriarchal structures. So it's not about giving more leadership positions to women in structures that are predominantly patriarchal. I mean, that is important, increased representation, but it cannot be only about that. And similarly, it cannot be about emphasizing sameness over difference or about equality alone. And I think in the previous presentation, there was great graphics that describe the difference between equality and the aspect around sameness and difference, very useful and set the stage for this conversation. And the idea is that it's not only about, I mean, about equality, but about difference. It is more than that. And one of the points that I want to make over here, drawing from Jill Blackmore, is that the idea of relational morality could be an alternative discourse. So creating an alternative system itself, or an alternative how organizations could be. So this could be relationships between individuals and community. The organizations are made up of relationships between individuals and the community. It can be about emphasizing attachments and responsibilities to self and the others. Often existing leadership discourses think of leadership as independent and autonomous individuals, but stressing instead more on interdependence and reciprocity, stressing on caring and commitment to others, and to shift the discourse from power over, that is domination and control, to acting with others. So that is the idea, or that's the vision of what a feminist approach to educational leadership might be. To give you an example, I'm going to shift now the conversation to specific instances, which is school community partnerships within India. This is, you might, as the ones who are familiar with the Indian context will know that schooling is very, very segregated in India. You have the government school system, which caters to a socioeconomic demographic, and private schools, the range of private schools which cater to more middle class to higher socioeconomic status. And you have the international schools that are gaining prominence, which are also private, and they cater to their elite schools. Right, so we've got a range of which is shaped by not only class but also by caste and also by gender. So, and what is important to note over here that the power relationships between parents and school administrators and teachers are going to be very different depending upon the nature of the socioeconomic status. Right. So, in a government school, for example, the school administration as well as the teachers will tend to be from a higher caste and a class than the ones whom they are catering to in rural communities or even in urban low socioeconomic status communities. And so often there may be a condescending attitude or an approach that the power dynamic can be quite high over there in these relationships. Whereas in international schools, that relationship may even flip in the sense that international schools charge really high fees from parents. And so then now that relationship becomes more of a consumer or a client relationship. The power relationships are very different in these. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to that. And in fact, many of these schools, like elite schools, also take on a corporate social responsibility of adopting poorer communities and providing education to those communities. And sometimes that power dynamic can get even in these kind of situations. Excuse me. I'm going to specifically, as the work that I'm going to talk about over here is related to my work as a feminist evaluator, which means that I with NGOs to kind of, specifically in the area of girls' education, that is, they are designing programs, because they're designing programs to enable girls who are likely to drop out in their primary and secondary education. They were likely to drop out after primary education and during their secondary education because of early marriage or domestic labor. And the interventions in these kind of NGO programs are to retain girls, but also to improve the quality of education. And one of the, and this with different NGOs where my role has been to evaluate the interventions and kind of see what works and what doesn't work in their interventions. And my focus over here is to highlight certain interesting differences between the ways NGOs work and the ways that the government school works, right? So that's what I'd like to focus on. So one example, so something similar across these NGOs. You'll find similar patterns in the interventions across NGOs. One is that usually there's a facilitator who's from the local community. And the interesting thing is that she's usually from the referred to as DD or as an older sister. And rather than as a teacher, rather than referring to her as sir, or rather than, which is usually sir or madam, referring to this facilitator as a DD or as an older sister. Part of this is to disrupt the hierarchy, which typically is there in a school's setting. And also the idea that she's from the local community, so can be more culturally responsive, rather than because in government institutions, they are posted in a particular place where they do not belong. Teachers come from elsewhere and teach in a location that they are not from. So this is one example. They are usually teaching girls. This is the example specifically of girls in marginalized communities. Life skills curriculum, which means that, for example, CARE USA had this program called Power to Lead Alliance, and the evaluation measured them on the Girls Leadership Index on key concepts of leadership like voice or assertion, confidence, decision making, to motivate others, and organization. So these were skills that were were developed amongst girls in this particular program, but the skills might be different in other programs. But the common thing across life skills education programs is that there is a gender rights is integrated with curriculum. So in that sense, leadership, the concept of leadership over here is kind of conceptualized in a more collectivistic manner rather than in an individualistic manner. And you will see that even in the important role in the pedagogy, which is to create peer networks so that they develop a collectivistic identity. Voice is understood as collective voice, decision-making and problem as part of groups. And a very important goal is to develop group solidarity. So it's really interesting to see how that leadership is framed in a more of a collectivistic sense. There are other elements of intervention. For instance, in Room to Read has a strong mentoring element, which is to help that children build trust with the facilitator, and the facilitator learns about the social and emotional context of the children, which teachers often do not have time to do so, or it's not part of their profile. And community mobilization is another important work. So unlike parent-teacher meetings, facilitators go to children's homes. They learn perspectives. They negotiate gender norms. There's a dialogue on gender norms. There's a lot more of trust building that happens between the facilitators, the children, and the parents and the community as a whole. So given this intervention, and there are variations. What can we learn as, in terms of developing a participatory approach to leadership? Now, I don't mean to say that this is like perfect, similar to what Mikhail was saying, that it's not that things are perfect, right? But it kind of gives a little bit of a vision into possible. And so, for instance, one issue is that bottom ranks, big or NGO organizations which are multinational, bottom ranks are there is a first world, third world power dynamic that is very much apparent, right? So definitely, it's not like the organizational structures are equal, but there are attempts. There are attempts to this. There are gender mainstreaming initiatives. Attempts to do gender-based budgeting, so that the organizational structures also can be changed, and not just the pedagogy and not just the program intervention, right? And my role as an evaluator, or my interest as an evaluator, has been to move participatory approaches, which brings in community perspectives, right, and community perspectives to different levels of organizational leadership, so that they listen to the voices of the different levels that are there. So that is part of the agenda of a participatory evaluator. And from these experiences, and I've realized that we need to recognize and disrupt power dynamics across multiple relationships. Teachers and students, this is very often the focus of creating democratic classrooms. School and parents, this also sometimes is the focus of creating collaborative relationships. But one area where I think we comparatively pay less attention to is the teachers and here school and parents, I mean school and community as well. And the third area is the hierarchy between teachers and school management, especially in private institutions where the hierarchy is far more, and very often in private schools, managers can treat their institutions as fiefdoms almost. So creating mutually responsive and non-hierarchical relationships, even between teachers and school management, is really important. And I would say that what a participatory approach to leadership would value is building trust towards equitable relationships and more knowledge sharing rather than it being top down and one way, and moving towards collectivistic and culturally responsive approaches to decision making, to action, right? Yeah, with these points, I think I'm close my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very good example that leadership can be organized in very many ways, and some ways are maybe more effective than traditional ways. And your intervention especially was very interesting because it's breaking some of the power rules and power traditions that we have, taking this feministic criticism into account. I think many of us are familiar with Nell Noddings, for instance, the scaring idea that she has. I think this is very interesting approach to leadership. I'm very much involved in curriculum development and curriculum theorizing, and there we say always that that curriculum is a complex conversation in the society. It's not one simple thing that we design, and maybe I can repeat the same for leadership. It's a complex conversation within the educational institutions, and so this is a very good example from you.
Thank you.
Okay, any comments or questions from our audience?
What is your
Yes.
very big question? What is your perspective regarding the implications of the NEP 2020 to the development of educational leadership in the context of a heterogeneous society such as India? And the NEP, it's quite a complex document. So I'll also ask Dr. Aneesh to share his perspectives on this. But what strikes me is the giving students quite in terms of selecting courses, right? I think it is quite disruptive in a positive way. I would say it's disruptive in the sense that we've created certain structures, right? But now students get a lot more power in terms of choosing this course versus another course, and it's moving to there's a lot more agency for students, and I think that's kind of disruptive for us to think where we have a particular structure, educators have a particular structure, and we have to organize it in that sense. And I'm talking more from a higher education point of view. So it's an interesting disruptive process. Again, I'm saying disruptive in a positive sense because it gives us the opportunity to create a new structure, right? So in that sense, yeah, I think it's complex and we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm not sure.
Okay, Prof. Srikant.
Yes, please. I have some 3-4 observations, and I'll be very brief as possible.
Yeah, sure.
In fact, Dr. Aditi's presentation was good, but I feel that certain observations need to be made from the perspective of having worked at national level. I have a very different perspective. I am maybe, sometimes we converge, sometimes I differ, I believe, with what you have presented. When it comes to certain diverging viewpoints, especially when in India, the reservation is impacting teachers' recruitment and deployment. So it's not that all higher caste people are there as teachers. So in fact, their percentage is very significant. We have scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, OBCs, and all other groups. So they are all part of the system, and even they're part of the teaching community. That's number one. And the second thing is that your observation with regard to NGOs is good, but the scale that we need to think about, it is very huge. So even NGOs need to support the government system. And that's what is happening with Ajim Premji and many other institutions who are supporting the government schools and helping them out. Then when it comes to seniority, you know that any teacher in India, the leadership positions are given on the basis of seniority. I agree with you. But a teacher, if a female teacher joins as a teacher, and after some time she is promoted as headmistress, so she can be a principal. So there is no stopping there. So again, the national professional standards for teachers, which is an offshoot of new education policy, talks about providing merit-based promotions rather than just simply based on seniority, which you were talking about, and also that these school complexes that NEP talks about, which will be unveiled shortly. So the teachers' recruitment will have to happen to a school complex. So that would also help this, what you said as Didi helping out the children. So I think these are some of the observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think those are really great observations, and I don't disagree with you on your observations. I think part of my agenda was to be a little bit provocative in the sense of kind of highlighting these issues. But as you mentioned, I think the government is making attempts to address, like you said, the caste-based reservations are an attempt to address this issue of caste and class, right? And so there are definitely interventions from the governance side to address the issues that I have kind of mentioned, and yes, also that there can be women do occupy leadership positions, but like I also said, that it's also about there being there is also still a challenge in terms of bringing in child-centric pedagogy within classrooms. This is not only government classrooms, it's across the board. And I think part of the general valuing of hierarchy and within the Indian culture is what I feel. So I don't disagree with you certainly, but I feel like these are issues that we are constantly dealing with. Sometimes in some situations it kind of works, and in some situations of persists is what we say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think now it's time to turn to the last presentation by Dr. Aneesh Kumar, who is having a presentation which is titled Fostering Positive Culture through School Parent Partnerships, Learning from Steps, Parenting and Wellbeing of One Mode by One Mode. And Dr. Aneesh is from same university, Christ University, Department of Psychology. He's assistant professor there and coordinator of undergraduate programs in Bengaluru. His research interests include socio-emotional development, free play, positive parenting, and positive school mental health. And he's also involved in many research projects, including development of gratitude among cultures. This is with the University of Virginia, USA, and many other things. He's very international person in the sense of research and cooperation, and also working with the USA institutions and also UK. So please welcome to this webinar, and the screen is yours, let's say that way.
Thank you very much, Professor Eero, and thank you everyone. I'll just hold the presentation. I hope it's visible now.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay. Thank you everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank Christabel and the team at the GINTL for associating, and we're happy to do this together. And also both my speakers who spoke and gave a quite an elaborate explanation about academic leadership from both the countries. And I guess that also saves a lot of time for me in terms of not needing to repeat a lot of things about education system. So I directly move into some of my work that I have done with schools. So I'm primarily working as a professor in the Department of Psychology, and my areas of interest are largely in terms of child development. So not like completely as a person in education, I'm more into psychology and then school mental health. And hence, some of my experiences are, or some of the things are largely drawn from my experiences working with schools. So as we get started, I have a quite quick slide. And I just thought I'll just ask the audience as to what are your memories of a parent-teacher meeting you've attended, either as a teacher, as a parent, or as a child. Like if you have any memories about a parent-teacher meeting that you've attended at any levels, and if you can recollect those memories, you can just put in the chat maybe what emotions you have, what are some of the quick words that come to your mind, and might give us a little bit of context of where I've kind of started working with parents and schools, or more to do with teachers and parents. Okay, so I would maybe some thoughts are coming in, so you can kind of post it, and we will see some of these getting discussed as we move forward. So my work has been, as I told you, has been not directly with schools, and I was initially not working with schools. I was more working with children who are victims of abuse. And then from there, I've kind of moved to working with schools in more prevention and promotive work. And also I'm a parent, so I have a 7-year-old at home, and young parents to parents would generally understand that your experiences into and about schooling and all of this would kind of take a U-turn or different when you have actually children who go into school. So some of these also led me to think about. So as I'm going forward in this presentation, a few things that I'm trying to cover is that is about understanding school family partnerships in India. But then I need to make a disclaimer that my work is primarily limited to the schools that I have worked with. And most of the schools that I have worked with are English speaking, or what we call in India as English medium schools, and a majority of them are private funded. So especially in this presentation that I have focused are my data and some of the insights that I've drawn from most of the privately funded schools, which largely have middle and upper middle class income families. And it's also most of these schools being located in a metro city. So as much as you know, India is a very schooling in India has, as Dr. Aditi spoke about, has a lot of systems, practices, and settings, and all of these a few kilometers apart are quite very unique. geographically, culturally, there's no one size standard size says this is Indian schooling system, and hence we are very multicultural, and hence no one size solution fits all. And family school partnerships are also very diverse and challenging, as I think Dr. Aditi mentioned about her work with largely public funded schools. And my work is that most of the time public schools are more like your walk-in schools. They are quite very open, exposed, and versus to the most private schools that are very closed within their walls, right? So in government schools, you know what's happening outside, some, not everything, but largely, like, you can kind of see the school is largely part of the community, versus to many of the schools that Dr. Aditi mentioned, use the word like international schools or private schools are an ecosystem of themselves, and they are a community by themselves, and they represent a different kind of thing. So the work that I'm kind of moving towards is more like, I'm taking this presentation most like more journey of exploring the need of partnership and the role of leadership in that. So it's not about how I'm going to talk about partnership and talk about leadership. It's about how I figured out, okay, there's a need for partnership, and there's someone who is missing here is in terms of leadership. So I thought I'd put it more in terms of how a journey of understanding many of these were. So we've kind of we had a request, or I had a request from a couple of schools that I was working, and the school principal then invited me for a discussion with some of his team, where he felt that the parents at the kindergarten had around 1,200 children in the kindergarten, and the kindergarten did not have had a major challenge working with parents. And one of the major issues that they said is that picking up children was a major issue to parent teachers argument, and sometimes not being supportive of each other, and hence they wanted to do something, and they felt that parents needed to be educated. So they'd invited me to talk about, can you do something as a webinar or as a session for parents where you can educate them as to how they should behave in the school, or to be very plain about it, to just tell them that, okay, this is how you're expected to be in a school, and you're expected to respect the teachers, you're expected to do the homework at home and send children, and some of that. Since I had a little bit freedom with the principal, that because I'd worked with him for a couple of years, I said, would it be okay to kind of also understand how your teachers look at this issue and how your parents look at this issue? And would it be okay if I talk to a couple of them, and would also like a couple of your sister concerned or associated schools? Then he's like, yeah, you can do that. And then we had to kind of go through the ethics protocol, and then we kind of went through some of these schools. And once we kind of looked at parents' perspectives, and we spoke to some of the parents, and interestingly our interviews with parents brought out a lot of interesting things, as you see in the screen. Parents are quite concerned about the schools, like they are very much interested in children's education, but then these were some of the few experts from excerpts from the data. Sometimes they felt that the school is not approachable. They felt that you should not ask back to the school. The school expects you to follow. They felt that teachers never liked to interact with them. They were not reachable. So they used to always get the messages from the teachers, but any message or call back to the teacher, they never get a response. And some of these were common trends, and they also felt that they pay the fees. So as I think earlier speaker said, they pay the fees, so they have the right to be involved, they have the right to be questioned, and hence the teachers are not up to the mark, or if there's an issue in the school, they have all right to question. And they felt that, and then most of the discussion, parents felt that they choose the best schools for their children, and they choose the schools based on the facilities that the school had. So the school had a good building, the school was a good reputation, and many of these things. And there's also a lot of literature about parents' perspectives of choosing schools, and how parents perceived about choosing of schools, and parents generally perceived about a schoolish way of development, and not completely a right way to put it. But then parents felt that, okay, I put my child into the best of the best schools in the city, and paying the highest fees, I'm bound to get my child will turn out to be really great. And denying the role that they have as parents, or equal role that they could also play in the child's education. and development. Similarly, we then went to look at, talk to teachers as to what were some of their challenges. Teachers had shared their perspectives about how parents were sometimes always questioning them, did not want to follow many of the instructions that they gave. Teachers believed that parents held a particular perspective about teachers, and this belief within the teachers were a major resistance for them to then start working. They believed that parents did not trust them. They believed that parents will not understand. They believed that parents perceived that teachers are always like cannot do these things or are meant to be. And they never felt the need, teachers never felt the need to work in partnerships. And most of the teachers in our work feel that, okay, parents need to be educated about what they need to do in schools. They never felt the need that they could work together. Teachers also found that the support that they received from the leadership and the demands that were placed on them in terms of by the leadership or by the system was also quite a major factor to kind of perspectives they hold. So when the leadership demanded that you need to work with parents, or when the leadership had a system that, okay, you need to make sure that you meet parents, then it became a requirement for the teachers to largely look at it. So from this, what we learned was that parents and teachers were largely at a crossroad. Like there was a lot of tension between, as you saw when you recollect memories about a parent-teachers meeting, there's a lot of tension between in a parent-teachers meeting where you're kind of exchanging about academics, when you're exchanging or talking about a child's development, but there's some kind of a tension where you're not always sharing the same kind of feelings about each other as adults. And though you're trying to achieve a similar outcome is the best interest of the child. So some of the questions were like, how can we convert these parent teachers meeting or the 5 minutes meeting that a teacher has once in 2 months or once in every term with the parents, and what prevented them from actually having a more mutual, respectful, trustful relationships? So can we, our question, my question and the team's question largely become that, can we get teachers and parents to get a shared vision? Can they kind of work together to kind of work on some kind of common vision or a shared vision? So we kind of then developed a program which was looking at possibly to look at partnering with parents, because the school was schools were quite supportive about it. And then we felt that getting parents into the school could help some of this. So we looked at Epstein's six steps or 6 ways of parental involvement in schools, which is quite very familiar or very well-read work. And Epstein gives 6 major ways that parents can be in parental involvement in schools. And he talks about how schools could be a good base to teach parents about parenting, how communicating with parents, and how teaching parents to support learning at home, how parents could also be volunteering and attending work or things that are part of school, and how parents could be made decision makers of things that the school is finding challenging or decisions that the school has to make, and how parents could also act agents to build stronger community connections and help the school largely work in sync with the community and in families. Keeping that framework, we developed a program which was called as the Early Childhood Parenting Steps Program. Coming from most of my work in positive child development, I've looked at this as framing in a more of a positive, using positive parenting principles, and then used this word of steps, which was acronym stands for like strong, trustful environments, those are positive and safe. And we ran this in school. So this program was part of school, and this was free for all. This was a small program. And here on all second Saturdays, most second Saturdays in the month, parents do not have, like, it's usually a holiday, and the school's working half day on Saturdays. So we've kind of looked at like Saturdays being 2 hours, and children can be engaged in extracurricular, some fun activities parallelly, and parents could sign up for this program and they could enjoy. We ran this program for a year, for one full academic year, and it went quite well. We've got kind of cohorts of parents coming in and then working, and kind of going through this program, what we learned primarily to this, bringing some of the learnings which to this presentation, is that what we learned from our program was parental well-being competence enhanced, and the connect that the parents had with the school increased. So at the end of the program, we could feel that the parents felt quite very connected with the school. They felt that they appreciated that the school has done something for us. We were quite happy about the school. They appreciated the school management. They were familiar with the school building. They felt that they could walk into their child's classroom, see the playgrounds, a lot of those things. But the teacher connect was quite still a concern. And then we started exploring the major barriers, like teachers didn't, though teachers who were parents also didn't ever attend many of our training programs. Teachers' well-being was a concern, and the larger leadership vision there to kind of this was more for a parent program. Why do you want to include teachers there? And we also felt that the larger climate matters. Though parents felt that they wanted to do a lot of things at home, this language that was spoken in the classroom was quite not similar, or was not matching with what we were doing in our sessions, right? So that was a learning. So we felt then the need was that from shifting from a parent program to getting these adults to be on board. That means the adults within the school who are the parents, teachers, and other adults in the school to be on board and to be partnering with each other and working together. And one of the major things that brought in newer perspectives and newer challenges was the pandemic itself, right? So through the pandemic, we then, where we were actually struggling, parents and teachers, to get together. When the pandemic, one good thing was that when they had to shift to online education, when they had to bring a lot of things, there was a lot of collaboration between teachers and parents. Teachers were willing to open a WhatsApp group or have some social media platforms where parents teachers were responding over phone messages. Parents and teachers were supporting each other where they did not have an internet or a gadget, or getting 2 or 3 children who were in the neighborhood to attend a class together. Parents then pitching in for teachers who were not well. So a lot of things which we were actually struggling, COVID or the pandemic kind of brought into their face to a need to change. So through the pandemic, we learned a lot of things about collaboration, partnership, and that's also made a lot of learning for us. Now, from there, we kind of moved through the pandemic, though teachers and parents were collaborating, we then shifted our lens slightly to school leaders who were actually struggling by themselves to kind of holding the whole school community together. They were assumed as the leaders of our school mental health and creating and maintaining suitable policies, structures, systems, which were not very much, there were no directives for schools to function. It was like an extended summer break. And then the leaders had to start themselves at every school how they function. Though the government gave a lot of directions, private schools or privately funded schools were left to themselves to how do they start. In some states, till grade 4, you were not supposed to run class, versus in some states, there were policy on how many hours you have to run classes. So every school had to come up with their own system. So we started looking at school leaders. And this is one of our work that got recently published. We looked at how leaders also had a lot of challenges and needs. And we then started questioning ourselves as to who becomes a school leader in the schools that we were working in. Most of them were like through the years of experience, or they did not have a chance. They were appointed as a leader, or there was some kind of financial incentives that they received. So none of them never received a training, support, supervision of being a school leader. And some of their experiences which we found in our study, where most of the leaders felt lonely, they had a low self-care, their work-life balance was quite challenging, and they had inadequate support systems. So putting all of these 3 learnings, that is our learnings from parents, our learnings from teachers, and our learnings from leaders, we then reflected, and then we kind of looked at what can we do for schools as schools return back from the pandemic, and what can we provide for schools, because you're starting a fresh academic year and you're coming back from COVID-19, which is a kind of a lot of learning losses, a lot of learnings for adults in the school. And then we proposed to kind of build 5 major pillars of positive school climate, and then focus on these as school leaders, in building these within your school in a couple of set of ways, or looking at for each school as to what you can do. The first pillar was to ensure safety. The first pillar was to look at ensuring safety, right? So safety includes as much as safety, physical safety, that space, avoiding like as much as sealing of any kind of health or risks to safety also included that largely children were coming after an impact of trauma. So how they are sensitive about how you use the trauma, being trauma sensitive to being trauma informed, and how some of your implicit biases about the pandemic, about some of these things can then challenge safety. So then we kind of, the schools were quite receptive. We kind of build policies, training, and building more safe spaces. Like, so there we felt we could more use aspects of creating a culture of caring, trust, and respect, and creating a safe haven. The word safe haven largely comes from people in development psychology. We speak about the safe haven and secure base from John Bowlby and Ainsworth's object relations work of actually creating that nurturing environment for the child, where the child's independence is not challenged, and providing that environment where the child can explore himself and herself, and parents and teachers together creating that safe space within the school as children come back to school nearly 2 years of gap. The second major thing was that we looked at the school as parts, and need to look at schools as an ecosystem itself, right? So whole school approach of mental health and well-being. I know Finland and other most countries have a lot of strong school-based mental health services, but India, there are school-based mental health services are different at different paces, depending upon the resources, depending upon the need. The mental health services are quite very different for schools. So a whole school approach to mental health and like kind of ethos, curriculum, positive behavior, anti-bullying, all of these can be embedded into the creating a positive environment through policies. What do you want to start afresh in your school? Like we've started a school in in the schools. We started a what went well wall. So teachers who were equally challenged coming back to school, we created a board where in the staff cabins, as they enter, there was a board as to when they come back from class, you pick up a pen and write on the wall of what went well, or www. This is what went well today after I've coming back 2 days of class, or 2 days after class. This is what went well. One student responded to my question, or there were children were smiling today. I could make a joke, or all students were present. Any little thing you could kind of appreciate, and that created a culture within the school of talking about things that are positive versus to usual narratives of trauma and victimization, to a lot of negative things that we carry back from classrooms or carry back home after a day of school. So then the third thing that we focused was on teaching learning experiences. Parents and teachers, most of them were, though we talk about positive psychology, socio-emotional learning, they were like, yeah, that's interesting, but do you have anything to talk about our max classrooms? Max is not going really well. My child is not leading English quite well. There are a lot of spelling errors. The teacher is not able to communicate properly. Then we figured out teaching learning experiences were key element of bringing partnering between parents and teachers, because parents are interested in listening about how their child is performed in the thing, and teachers also expect that. So we then converted some of these teaching learning experiences off to the Geelong Grammar School project by Martin Seligman, where they speak about the teach it, live it, learn it, teach it, embed it, and live it. That means if you are teaching mathematics, and mathematics is quite very challenging, and children have an anxiety. We have terms like mathematics anxiety, mathematics phobia, and a lot of these things, and socio-emotional aspects of fear actually inculcates or comes into mathematics learning, which acts as a barrier. So can maths teacher and the parent communicate about where is the problem in maths learning? And we use like fun elements of maths learning, and both parents and teachers and the child had quite discussions about the teaching learning experiences in class, how a maths homework was challenging could have been converted to some more fun. Where is the block? So the third aspect of building pillar was to talking about teaching learning experiences to more solution focused. And the fourth pillar was to building positive relationships between parents, between adults in the school, as so that they are more compassionate to each other. And we asked the parents to talk to the teachers as they walk in, to at least put one word of appreciation that you've found in the teacher over semester. So teachers, and then we asked teachers, how did it feel? So teacher said that one parent asked me at the morning 8:30 when I started the breakfast, ma'am, sorry, at the meeting, he asked me that, ma'am, did you have breakfast? And the teacher was almost into tears, because she said that in her 10 years of teaching, and every year she has parent teachers meeting. Meeting starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, and nobody is concerned about how from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock she's sitting through the meeting and finishing meeting 40 parents. And this small act by a parent made a big difference for her, right? So building positive relations between parents, between teachers, and modeling these behaviors also helped a lot, because we heard narratives that usually parents used to speak about teachers in front at home, that, okay, you know, his max teacher is not up to standards, she doesn't know to teach properly, or teachers talk about parents in front of children. We kind of try to help parents and teachers rework on those narratives and build positive relationships with each other. And the last thing, the fourth pillar of positive education, is the leadership itself. We focused on more strength-based leadership, wherein we've looked at providing some kind of support for leadership, so we kind of got 6 to 7 leaders from different schools to just talk to each other. And we've got a small kind of listening circles, where school leaders should just share about what were some of their challenges in their schools, and they found solutions from the other leaders in the class, in the webinar. So we've then found that the leaders also required support. And here I'm more talking about a transgenerational trauma or cycle, where we talk about like healed leaders, right? Sometimes leaders in higher position were teachers themselves, but then they fail to understand that one day they were also a teacher, and they kind of they forget that they were also a teacher. And the way they treat some of their colleagues, the way they create the environment to be more threatening, fear-based, sometimes we looked at, they are not healed as leaders, and they forget to take care of themselves. 99% of the leaders that we worked with were not taking care of themselves. For them, they were like full-time engaged in their leadership roles, and their self-care was very poor. So to wrap up, as we say that adults need to be prepared for the partnership, and we need to prepare adults for partnership. And the movement that we started was called as the Wellbeing Van, or the school mental health through a Wellbeing Van model. And hence, good adults are all these adults whom we've spoken so far, the leaders, the teachers, and parents, can actually create good environment in the school. So partnership is not just about an agency. Partnership is about collaborative movements, supporting, protecting each other, because your vision or your agenda is the same. All of us are interested in children. We want best children. We want best for our children. We love our children, but somewhere we kind of do not respect them, or do not respect the other adults who are also interested in children. It's like Donald Winnicott in his work writes about a good enough mother, and you can kind of look at a good enough adult who is in a caregiving role. There's some invisible adults in the school, and in Indian context, I would put invisible adults, the school mental health team. And when we worked with school counselors, they also had a lot of challenges because they were actually looked up to any kind of mental health issues or well-being issues, but they were nowhere in the system for partnership, collaboration, or facilitating that partnership. So when there was a conflict between a parent and a teacher and administration, or issues that to be resolved, counselors or school mental health professionals were not largely ignored, right? So the school mental health team could also bring in a lot of newer insights and also support the agenda of partnership. And social media is one of the biggest tools that we've kind of used and aided, because social media, like you see too in the Wellbeing Van as an Instagram, and a recent one which we started 2 weeks back as a podcast, and both of them were run by our students. And so it provides some kind of insights for teachers to kind of, okay, let's talk about some of these things. So starting a school Instagram page, starting a small WhatsApp group for teachers and posting about their experiences became a very facilitating process for teachers to start opening up and sharing some of their issues and communicating some of these issues. So to sum up, we need to get all the adults on board to a well-being van and to foster steps. That means foster strong, trustful environments. Those are positive and safe. And this can be only possible if we get all the adults together on board, because partnership is not a teacher business. Partnership is not a leadership business. Partnership is every adult's business who is in part of school. So adults can be great agents, and we need culturally competent and evidence-based practices from more deficit approach, because psychology largely takes a deficit approach, because school mental health team comes in when you have a bullying issue or when you have an issue in the school. But we need to look at more strength-based approach of promotive mental health. And in another issue in school mental health in India is that we have anyone who can talk about school mental health to rather than a trained one who speaks about mental health, right? So that's again about advocacy. So together, all adults can create a positive ecosystem, and because it takes a village to build, to raise a child, to raise an ecosystem. So that's it from my end. These are some of my references. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very inspiring presentation, I would say. I think this is an idea to educate parents for collaboration. It's a very great idea also for Finnish context. I think we all are experiencing some problems with the school parents collaboration. So before going into the final discussion, maybe there are some questions to Aneesh directly concerning this presentation, please. It looks like we don't have any specific questions to you, but maybe we can then go into a summarizing discussion. To me, this was very inspiring session, and I found that it is easy, I think, for academics to agree about principles and main issues related to schools and education. I could agree with every one of you presenting today. The idea, of course, is common in everywhere in the world, enhancing student learning in schools and different institutions. But and also when visiting schools in different countries, I've been visiting once in India, in Mumbai area, and then eastern part in a tribal school, and also been working very much with the Indonesian schools during the last 10 years. I think it's easy to see that teachers have the same aim. That teachers are similar in their aims of trying to provide children good education. But then, of course, we can say that devil is in the details always, how we do it, and what are the problems in different contexts, because countries are different, and to me, for instance, India is the most complex society that I know. It's also a very interesting society, but there are so many varieties in the culture, and it is also same for Indonesia. I think they have 650 native languages, for instance, and my experience in Indian school was in the eastern part was that the teaching was in English, but then the state official language was different, and also at home children spoke different language than state language and English. So this language problem became very evident in the school context, it is sometimes very hard for children to understand what teachers are talking about. But of course, these are issues that we have to tackle with, and now we have heard very interesting solutions and very interesting cases from India, especially that seems to be generalizable into other contexts also. So, do you have any comments or questions to our presenters, or to summarize this session somehow? What was interesting? What was problematic from your point of view? Anybody wants to say something? Yeah, I think we have learned very much about cases that are interesting, very nice approaches to tackle this collaboration between parents and schools. I think in Finnish context, we have used social media very much to communicate between parents and schools, and sometimes I'm hearing from parents that there are too many messages coming from school to homes about children's being late, or children missing from the classrooms or whatever they are. Sometimes this communication is very detailed and focusing on the individual students instead of being more like community-based, how to enhance education in the whole community, and how to develop curriculum so that it provides more skills and competencies for the future of children. Pia, you are muted. You are muted.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to say that Professor Dr. Risto has his hand up, so I think he would like to ask a few questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Christabel. In fact, there would be a lot of questions to Aditi when you talked about the feministic approach. I was feeling a resemblance to Finland, so much emphasizing early childhood education at the moment, that coming with softer values, so to say, more about the whole families and not just children and youth in school. And then to Aneesh, when you talked about if we should educate parents, and when I was working as a secondary education principal, I do remember teachers often saying that we should have parent schools so that we can collaborate, and don't remember how many years ago we started collaborating with a lot of parental associations, not just in Finland, but with the European Parental Association, Estonian, etc. And they all come with the same challenge, that how can we behave so that we could be part of school decision making. And if I think about that from the perspective of Finland, where we do not have compulsory schooling in Finland. And we Finns do not often understand that because the education system works so well. We have compulsory education and the parents are responsible for that. And educational organizations are really, in my opinion, the society's way of serving the parents to take care of that responsibility. And when the parents are the clients, I wonder what kind of clients they have to be so that they can be good enough for that service, and how does that really work. And it's really a lot about the mission of education too, and then I think that is dramatically transforming in Finland at the moment, and it will change the professional identities of everyone working in the field of education too. There were questions and comments in a blur.
Yeah, I thank you very much for those comments and questions. I was just trying to pick up some thoughts, and as you were speaking, uh, see, the major issue, or not, it's not an issue. The interesting thing is India is a very, very multicultural uh, environment, and parenting and teaching are very deeply rooted systems, right? So culturally, the way parenting is understood in India, it's very, very different. Like we talk about current parenting in India, which is more individualistic and collectivistic. Like you want your children to have choices. Like I want my daughter to make choices for the clothes that she wears, the education that she wanted to make, because I'm picking it up from. But I, at the same time, I have that collectivistic. It's always in consultation with, it's always together, it's always about the family. And so as much it doesn't happen that easily, it's quite very complex. Like how much are you interested or invested in the education of the child? And as I told in my presentation, I picked only parents from the middle and upper middle class, English speaking metro cities, because most of them were working, they are educated. The issue might be very different if you go to another community, like as the discussion that was between Professor Shrikant and Aditi. So in this context, both the parents and the same is with teaching. If you talk to teachers in India, they would also have same challenges of how children are changing, how value systems are changing, and how teaching is becoming a very demanding job, and the respect is gone for teachers. And they don't feel that. So in both these groups, like parents as well as teachers, are two it's very difficult to get them on the same pace. We've tried many programs. It's very difficult because they, in the meetings, they will agree on everything, but then they would come to me and say, so you say that we agreed to it, but these things parents should do. And parents will like, yeah, we agreed to it, but isn't it the teacher's job? So then we've kind of collaborating was that to start on little things. We felt that it was too like as much, because and what I used was that I've been a coordinator for the department for a decade now, like 10 years now. And I had the undergraduate programs and around 3,500 students in psychology. A major problem with it's same. The students and teachers' interpersonal relationships are quite very challenging. And what sometimes worked, like sometimes the teacher is not willing to give away and the students also don't give away. And sometimes I go to class and I say, I understand the teacher is wrong and I apologize on the behalf of the teacher. The students will like, no, you don't need to apologize for it. We totally understand. And sometimes I talk to the teachers like, see, just forgive the child and it's okay. He'll apologize. They let go. So I picked up from there, and then I used the same in the school with the parents and teachers. teachers. To some extent, it worked. Like some things that they could work together was like, okay, can you host an event together? So use the parent to support a class where you don't have teachers. Parents were like, oh, I'm speaking at my child's school. Your picture's there on the social media where you've been invited. Some of those were little things that we could start, but it's a lot of challenge to get both of them together. And I guess you've from what you spoke and from your experience, you know how difficult it is to, from a case to case, institution to institution, how getting both of these people is quite challenging. And my experience is quite very limited to the limited work I've done. So those are my little thoughts, and I'm sure I'm not answered complete your question, but these are my quick thoughts on that.
Very nice example. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, are there any other comments? There are in the chat, we have a couple of comments which are not actually questions, I think, but comments about the overall comments about the presentations. Thank you for those.
Can I make a comment or question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it was quite an eye-opening for me to listen to Mihail, and I think especially the response that you gave to the question that was posed to you. I was quite surprised to know that the challenges are quite similar, and also in terms of that the education is mandatory, but schooling is not, if I've understood right.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mean to say like an open schooling or homeschooling by then?
Yes.
Okay. So but it's interesting to know the very structured model, and it took some time to understand the model that you've presented. It looks very organized and structured, and even in class we were yesterday discussing about the talk, and I think there's a recent movie that spoke about how Norway's education and Norway's parenting is in India. There's a recent movie, so students' discussion was all around like, isn't Finland and Norway quite very rigid in their practices, and aren't we more flexible? So I couldn't give them an answer, but then I think since there's a time I can ask you, like, because you've seen both the schools, and this is what one of my students asked, don't you think Indian schools or Indian systems are quite flexible, and on the other side there are strict, very expected rules to follow? So I said I don't have an answer for your question, but probably if I get time I might ask that and get back something for you.
Okay, thank you very much for these presentations and for this discussion. I think we have exceeded our time limit about half an hour, but this has been interesting, and I think we have continued this because of this interesting topic and interesting presentations. So I have learned a lot. I think you are doing great work in all of the presenters in what you are doing, and the overall I think we agree about this issue that leadership is really crucial for enhancing learning, but there are a lot of elements related to the context and cultures and histories based on the region and area, and those have to be taken into account when we are designing education and curricula. So thank you for my part also for this very interesting session, and maybe Pia has something to say at the end of this webinar.
Thank you, Eero. It's been great having you here. Yeah, we will post the recordings in the YouTube channel. And I think, I don't know, it's just great I think it's always get really interesting questions and point of views when you get the Finnish academia and the Indian side together. So I think we should still, despite a bit unfortunate low turnout today, but still I think the quality kind of overrides the quantity of the participants in this case. But thank you very much, and I hope we see you again in our next GINTL India events, and we'll keep you posted on the forthcoming events. Thank you. And thank you, Eero, for also doing great job as a moderating and leading the conversations.
Thank you to everyone, and thank you very much for this very interesting topic and webinar. Hopefully we can continue, and you can always email me also if you are interested in collaborating in some ways.